board was different again tonight, so it's
So
unusual.
it always makes your life exciting, doesn't it, Bill?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, but we're on the air now.
We are on the air. Before, there was another show on the air with us simultaneously.
Not a good thing, from
No,
what I
no.
know. That's the kind of thing that makes life a little bit too exciting, yes?
You hear it every now and then on the radio, and so they've got a new program in here, so it's different.
Ah. So tell me, Bill, what's going on in the national news that you care about? Have you joined the Ted Cruz fan club?
National news that I care about. Well, today I read a newspaper from 1932, so probably
Where was that?
I had it at my house.
Oh, I see.
Sorry.
What are you, a hoarder in training? Or?
I have no idea why I saved it, but there was an article about Dillinger and Sault Ste. Marie, so that was kind of interesting.
John Dillinger was in Sault Ste.
Yeah.
Marie?
There was always rumor that he'd left a fortune behind. He had a
Oh.
girlfriend there that he went to visit.
Oh, I love those kinds of stories.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever found the fortune nor the girlfriend.
Well, he should have had money. He robbed all those
Yeah,
banks.
but what were they getting? A few $100, 500, six
I
hundred,
don't
1,000. They
know.
weren't getting much out of those banks.
Uh, my parents bought a property, and there was an old shed on there that a man had lived in. He was a bit of a hermit, had lived there for about 10 years, and the rumor was that it had all sorts of money hidden somewhere. And I can't tell you how many weekends we spent
Digging, looking.
digging, looking, digging, nothing. No, no, sad but
I
true.
think national news that's got me bothered or worried or upset or I'm interested in. That's embarrassing.
Ah. Well, I must tell you the one other hidden money story that I do know about. I had a friend who bought a restaurant up north, and they decided to remodel, and it had one of those nice black and white checkerboard type floors. The reason they got the restaurant at somewhat of a bargain was that the owner had been blown up by a bomb. It had been sent to his home. I think it was actually his wife that opened the package and was blown away, but anyhow, the family decided to get rid of the restaurant after that. And what happened was, as they were lifting up the floor tiles, under each tile they would find like a $10 bill or a $50 bill or a $100 bill. And we're talking about 50 years ago, so this was a big deal. And they ended up with close to $10,000 by the time they tore that place apart for their remodeling. So it was a much better deal than they had ever imagined. Yes.
I have never run into one of those situations.
No, I'm usually the
Yeah.
person that loses money on
Yeah,
something like
I've
that.
never had that happen.
But tonight we're going to be talking about an interesting ballot initiative. We have Jeffrey Hank, who's a local attorney, and there's a ballot proposal coming up to add recreational marijuana to the bill. I think you actually have the ballot
I do.
proposal. Did you want to tell us the precise wording?
I will. It is the proposed amendment to Article 8 of the Lansing City Charter to add Chapter 5, marijuana, in quotes, and Section 8501. Shall the Charter of the City of Lansing, Michigan be amended such that nothing in the Code of Ordinances shall apply to the use, possession, or transfer of less than 1 ounce of marijuana on private property by a person who has attained the age of 21 years? And the answer is yes or no.
And Jeff, you are the person who helped to get that on the ballot. So what are you thinking is going to happen now? Are people, is this a popular issue? Do you think we're going to see a change here in Michigan, in Lansing?
As far as I can tell, Bonnie, I believe this is going to pass. Every city in Michigan that so far has had a similar initiative dealing with cannabis reform has passed it. Detroit, Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, Flint. So this year, Lansing, Ferndale, and Jackson all have a similar initiative up. And if the trend continues, along with what we've seen nationwide and people's changing attitudes, we expect that this will be passed. So we're looking forward to the election.
Now, what will that change? What will mean that, what will you be able to do? Can people walk down the street with a lighted joint in their hand?
No, absolutely not. We want to make that very clear.
Why not?
Some people
Oh,
have some.
actually, I was excited there for a minute.
Well, some people may like that, but I think politically speaking, this is an initiative that covers private property. And the reason that being
Only
is,
at home then.
well, not necessarily only at home, but the idea, of course, is that we don't want, the common critiques we hear that people don't want when it comes to cannabis reform is they don't want people driving under the influence,
Hmm.
and they don't want it around children. So this ordinance is designed, or not ordinance, but this charter amendment is designed to eliminate any concerns with those two sort of main or core concerns that we hear from opponents or people who have concerns about it, which are very few, and that would prevent people from using on playgrounds, in parks, on the street. Minors are not allowed to use, possess, or transfer under this law, and it doesn't affect state laws of driving under the influence. So again, this is just related to adults on private property. So we believe those concerns are assuaged by what we're trying to do.
Can I open a hash bar?
That is not really the intent or purpose behind what we're doing here. A lot of people get a lot of questions about whether this would affect dispensaries. This is not this is a very simple change in the law we're trying to do here, so it's not complex dealing with dispensaries, dealing with commercial operations. You get into that, all of a sudden you've got state issues of sales taxes, you've got federal issues, you've got the banking issue, tax issues, all those kinds of things that we really can't address at the local level, so we're not really trying to address that.
So it would be silent on that issue, or it would just not allow it?
It's silent on the issue.
Silent
I mean,
on the issue.
the way we view transfer, we get to ask this
Yeah.
question a lot, whether transfer includes sale. We didn't use the word transfer, or I'm sorry, sale, because we believe transfer is a more broad term, and that transfer could include the sale. We get asked this a lot. This again isn't meant to be, or our design is not for it to be a commercial kind of ordinance. That's not what we're trying to do.
It's for the person who might be caught with marijuana and therefore it's not going to be charged. Is that the whole idea?
Exactly, and the idea that if you're an adult and you're over the age of 21 and you transfer some cannabis to someone else who's also over the age of 21 and you're doing this on private property, you shouldn't be arrested for that. You shouldn't be cited for that. And if you're going to give someone something of value, it makes sense that you receive something of value of exchange. So the idea is that you could exchange money, but it's not again dealing with this idea of a commercial sale or dispensaries and things of that nature.
One of the things that gets complicated for me is it seems like a lot of the efforts to reform the marijuana laws focus on the end user and trying to decriminalize their actions. At the same time, it's as if they almost pretend that nobody ever grows it or sells it. So
Sure.
you would cover the sale, but you wouldn't cover the growing?
Well, I view what we're doing in a broad sense in the same way that's simple, that transfer could potentially include cultivation, but if you're familiar with cannabis cultivation, cultivated in an ounce is not that much
No.
cannabis. So would you be protected in doing a major grow operation or something like that? No, you wouldn't.
Now, this will only really have an impact on the Lansing police then. The state police would still enforce state law.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
But the point behind that is, and we get asked this a lot too, is that the overwhelming majority, 95 to 99% of marijuana arrests or citations are at the state or local level. Quite often it's the local police who do it. So if you're in the city of Lansing and you have an interaction with the police for something related to cannabis, it's most likely going to be with the Lansing police.
But if you would be stopped with it even in your pocket on the street, this law would not protect you.
No, we believe it would, and that's another
you do?
question we get about public public property. We think if you're in transit from one place to another, you shouldn't be arrested. This is a simple amendment that we're trying to pass here, and we didn't go into all these nuanced issues that could come out as a result of it, but we believe you'd be protected. What you wouldn't be protected from doing is if you're under the age of 21, or if you're openly using something out in public. That's where you wouldn't be protected.
Or if you're driving in Lansing Township.
Correct.
One of the major criticisms about the medical marijuana law was that its vagueness led to a lot of complications and a lot of court cases that have yet to resolve what the issue really does and doesn't cover.
Sure.
So there was sort of a talk about how you needed to be as specific as you could be to ensure that you weren't going to have unintended consequences. But you feel that this law is both broad enough and specific enough to accomplish the purpose you want?
Well, we hope so, and our purpose really is to eliminate the penalty for simple adult use, possession, or transfer of marijuana. And we're trying to prevent people from, all the harms that come with arrest, conviction, probation, drug testing, the employment issues, student loan issues,
That's a huge
all
issue.
those kinds of things. Well, we don't have a voting issue here in Michigan. You possibly could in another state. If you can be charged with simply passing a joint. If you and Bill were to do this amongst yourselves in your own privacy, your own home, that could be considered a felony. That could be felony distribution and transfer of marijuana. So we want to eliminate that. We think more harm comes from a result of prohibition than is prevented by it. And the further this idea, the reason we call ourselves a Coalition for a Safer Lansing is that we hope that we think, one, that more harm is a result of prohibition than of the use of cannabis, and we hope that this saves police resources when Lansing is laying off police officers, and we see these statistics about violent crime in the state of Michigan in general, but also Lansing. We want police to focus on real crimes with real victims, but we go even further than that. That we think that if there's a more positive relationship between people and the police will be more encouraged to cooperate with each other and have respect for each other. And I would kind of like to throw out that old saying that we heard during the Egyptian Revolution a few years ago that the people in the police or the people in the army were one. Well, I don't think a lot of people in Lansing and just in America don't feel that way. We feel that we have a militarized police force, and the war on drugs has created that militarized police force. And so what we hope is that besides police resources being used to go after real crime, that we'll have more harmonious relations between local people and the police. And all in all, when you take all those things into consideration, and the final point would be that people actually die from cannabis prohibition. They don't die from using marijuana. No one's ever shown me an actual case where it's directly tied to that. But you do see cases where an 80-year-old woman whose home isn't properly raided because someone's accused of being a drug house, being shot by accident, with people's dogs being shot. We really believe this will make people safer. And because the majority of these citations and arrests happen at this local level, we're going to eliminate almost all of those events from actually occurring.
Well, we know that alcohol and tobacco together account for about 300,000 deaths a year. Even cocaine and heroin together only account for 3,000, and nobody's ever died from marijuana. So it's sort of an inverse legal situation in terms of the penalties you face.
Jeffrey, has the Lansing Police Department taken a stance on this through their union?
Not formally that I'm aware of, no.
Is there any idea how many cases that would involve what you've just described in the Lansing area? Arrests for...
Unfortunately, I don't have a hard statistic on that, but it does happen. And
yeah.
When you say Lansing area or
Lansing, Michigan,
you can make a distinction between that, because there's a difference with how you're treated with marijuana if you're caught in East Lansing versus St. John's. You may be in Clinton County. You may be out in the west side of Lansing, where you're actually in Eaton County, and you're dealing with a lot of different authorities, and depending on who you're dealing with, you're going to be treated differently. So again, this only affects the city of Lansing, but that's the core of this population center here, and we think it'll have the greatest effect, and that's why we chose Lansing also as a capital city as a model for how this could work.
One of the problems we have right now with the medical marijuana law is that the appeals court has now banned the use of cannabis oil, that the only form in which you can ingest cannabis medically now is the plant form itself. So I don't know whether your change in the charter would impact people's ability to use cannabis oil or any other forms, or only marijuana, or hashish included, any other?
Well, yes and no, and that's a tough question that will probably be decided later by some judge or some court somewhere. Ideally, our charter amendment would cover any use of marijuana, whether it's a derivative or not. But again, that's a state law issue where if you're outside of the city of Lansing, or if you have state officials, they would probably, I believe you're referring to the Carruthers opinion, which I think is being appealed to the Supreme Court and will hopefully be reversed, because it seems to lack common sense.
It does.
And it seems to undermine the purpose of the act. But ideally, under what we're proposing, you would have, the idea here is to return freedom to people who are adults. You have a right over your body. You have a right to choose what you put in your body. You have a right to privacy. You have a right to your own personal property. We view this as sort of a reassertion. Well, not as far as you could ideally go. It's a reassertion of rights that we had once and we've lost, and we're now hoping to regain, at least partially. And then hopefully when Lansing and these other cities do this, legislators at the state level will see, hey, the sky is not falling. Everything's okay. People support it. The political cover is there, and we can do something at the state level where it really needs to happen. Then
7 years before I was born, Henry Anslinger was the one who made marijuana illegal in this country, and people forget it was perfectly legal before that. One of the challenges, though, that I think is that we're dealing in a situation where the crazy quilt of laws that we're now facing as people try to reform this in a piecemeal kind of way, to my mind, is it's leading to what I call the Lawyers' Full Employment Act.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had Lance Forsberg and Dennis Forsberg, done videos with them. I've been doing videos on the Green family, Steve and Maria Green. What we see are people who think they're operating within existing law.
Sure.
As these laws change. Then another agency comes in, or as we have here in the state of Michigan, Attorney General Bill Schuette goes around county to county and tries to encourage prosecutors around the state to go ahead and prosecute for medical marijuana anyhow, which we see in Oakland County. They've kind of taken up the cudgels. So I think people are getting really frustrated and confused that, wait a minute, Dennis Forsberg is doing 3 years in federal prison, and you have to ask for what? Because he thought he was operating under the law.
It's a travesty. I didn't know Dennis Forsberg, but I did know Ryan Bayshore, and I'm familiar with the case of the Okemos 7, the Lansing 7. And Ryan was actually an inspiration for us doing this here in Lansing before he went away. He was helping support this morally. And when you see people who have, not really engaged in a crime, they've grown a plant. I mean, his actual crime is a thought crime of conspiracy to grow a plant near a school. When you step back in the abstract and you look at that we're throwing people in federal prison for 3 or 4 years for the thought crime of conspiring to grow a plant, in the abstract, it's absurd, it's a tragedy, it's a travesty, it's an injustice, it's horrendous, it's unconscionable. And we believe that people in general feel that way. I mean, the polls that I've seen are, skyrocket high that an overwhelming majority of people, I think it's less than 10%, believe that someone should be in jail for the use of marijuana. So the question is, why haven't our laws caught up to this? And as you said, it's a piecemeal law. It depends where you go, especially when it comes to the State Medical Marijuana Act. You're in one county or one city, you're going to be treated differently than another, and that's unfortunate. And so, again, that's kind of why we're doing it the way we are, which is different than what Grand Rapids did, for example, where they did decriminalization. Some people refer to what we're doing as decriminalization.
Yeah, it's really legalization, isn't it?
It's legalization, or I like to use a term re-legalization, because again, we're just going back to a right that you already ought to have. And if we had legislatures that didn't pass unconstitutional laws in the first place, if we had executive branches that didn't enforce these laws, and if we had judicial branches which struck down these laws when they came before them, we wouldn't be in this situation. But unfortunately, we are, and it's up to the people to let their politicians know that we want our constitutional rights back, and we want the police to focus on real issues, and we hope that we're going to have a safer and better society if we do that.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan.
Jeffrey, how did you get interested in this area of law?
Well, that's a long and interesting question, Bill. I've always been interested in what I consider to be human rights and American democracy, and this idea we have in this American system of limited government and respect for people's fundamental rights. And it struck me as bizarre ever since I was a teenager even, that this is how we reacted to things. And I was always very concerned about the idea of a police state forming in America. And I believe in some ways we have what I would call a soft police state today. Many people don't think we have a police state until you're faced with the police state and your assets are seized without a jury trial or without conviction or something like that. And so in the career that I've been in, I've seen a lot of this firsthand. I mean, I've seen opposite ends of the spectrum where you may have a judge who has total disrespect for the Medical Marijuana Act and prosecutors who are just out to nail somebody. On the other hand, I'll be back in the judge's chamber and I'll have the judge say, I'm going to go get my medical marijuana card. I wish this would be legal, and why do we enforce these laws? And it's frustrating because that, to me, is not the ideal of the America I grew up to believe in. And I don't want to believe that our rights and our guarantees of freedom are the equivalent of Santa Claus, or something you're told about as a kid. They don't really exist in the real world. So what frustrated me was that this is happening, and I believe that people ought to do something about it. And you talked about the Lawyers' Full Employment Act. I mean, I do know lawyers, a minority, I would say, that probably like marijuana being illegal because it does provide them with job security. I mean, I make money representing people on the most silliest, absurd of marijuana
They want to keep
cases.
it illegal because it...
I'll give you an example, though. Let's say you get caught with marijuana in the city of East Lansing. They don't really care about it. You'll go in there and they'll say, why don't you just pay us $500 for a littering ticket? You didn't even litter, but they just want your money. So part of what we're doing, going back to the Grand Rapids contrast, is there's no civil infraction involved here. There's no penalty. You don't pay money if you're caught with marijuana, because we don't believe you ought to be charged or interacted with the police at all for exercising a right that you ought to have already as an American. That's like saying you're a newspaper and they've taken away your First Amendment rights, and then they kind of give them back to you a little bit, but you could still be fined $100 because you write an article that someone doesn't like. No, you either have an absolute right here to do this or you don't. So we don't believe, here in Lansing anyway, that decrim with a fine is the way to go, because we believe it's your right in the first place, and that's why we've chosen the route we have without any sort of civil penalty attached.
I think the biggest change we've seen in policing over the decades, I was Associate Director of the National Center for Community Policing for 9 years. And we've seen this sort of privatization of the police where they are now self-supporting through the forfeiture laws, as you're talking about. You don't even have to be found guilty later. If after they seize your property and sell it off, the proceeds just go back to the police department. We've seen the militarization of the police. We see an awful lot of technology from the military moving into domestic policing. I mean, I think we've seen a dramatic social change in the changes in attitudes on same-sex marriage, and I'm hoping we'll see the same change in drug laws. Is this part of a larger movement to decriminalize other drugs beyond marijuana?
On behalf of the Coalition for Safer Lansing, no, it's not.
Okay.
I mean, we do hope that it's a bigger part of cannabis reform in general, whether that's asset forfeiture or cultivation or hemp or those types of things. But no, we have no position on other drugs.
I mean, prohibition is prohibition, regardless of how you look at it. So that's one of the challenges.
Now, we've got this is coming at a time when we have an election. Now, do any of the candidates openly support this?
Yeah, actually, it's been great, and the majority of them seem to. The mayor came out very strongly in favor of us, and that was an unsolicited endorsement. I've never spoken with Virgin Monero about this at all, and I noticed a few of the candidates seem to have those issues about young folks under 21 and all that. But again, that's not really part of what we're doing here. They're not protected under this charter amendment anyway. So I've been very encouraged, actually, without having even spoken with any of the council candidates, that the majority of them support some sort of change. I mean, 10 years ago, I think they would have been afraid to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I think the mayor's strong stance, which I congratulate him for, and I thank him for being willing to be on the cutting edge of this and saying the things that need to be said from people in position of power. There's just like private individuals, I think a lot of politicians still feel there's a stigma here. They feel that if they come out for a sensible reform that most people seem to support, that somehow that's going to politically backlash against them, but I don't think that that's the case anymore. So we're very happy to see Lansing City Council candidates either supporting our charter amendment exactly, or proposing that at least something needs to be done, if it's even decriminalization. So it's a positive sign.
Is anyone openly opposing it?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I believe there was a few council candidates said they wouldn't support it, but we have not had any formal opposition that I'm aware of whatsoever. I mean, we gathered thousands of signatures on the street. I think at the end of the day, it was over 7,000 some, which is a lot of work, I would add, by the way, to do that. And,
Yeah.
and it's sort of the purest form of democracy, if you will, because you're approaching strangers on the street and you debate with them. I mean, some people will sign right away. You don't even have to explain it. But a lot of people, they want to hear you out. They want to argue it. They'll sign at the end of the day. You get a few, very small minority who won't sign it. But it is sort of, you really get to gauge public feeling. I mean, you deal with everybody of all walks of life when you're out there collecting signatures. So I think support for this is the idea of it, even if not the specifics of what we're doing, is widespread. And, we're starting to see that change in Washington and Colorado and Michigan and other states and Uruguay and Mexico City and all over the world. People are changing their minds on this.
I always like it when parents are concerned about their kids getting their hands on marijuana. I keep reminding them that under the prevailing laws, the ones we have now that criminalize everything, research shows that a majority of kids in high school say that they could get their hands on marijuana within 10 minutes. So I mean, I'm not sure they'd make it harder for them.
In a city they don't even live in.
Right.
Yeah, right. Kids have access to marijuana right now. That's the thing we point out. This isn't going to change that. It's still going to be illegal for them to use marijuana. I mean, I wish we could do something more for youngsters and not saddle them with the burdens of criminal record and all the things that come out about that. I do think we need to, as a society, address that better. But we want to make it very clear that young people are not going to be emboldened or given a better chance to use marijuana under what we're doing here. It's still going to be a penalty, and people are fooling themselves if they think that the youth can't get easy access to marijuana right now. I grew up in this area, Bonnie. I grew up in Holt. I've lived in East Lansing for the past 9 years or so. It has always been very easy to get marijuana. Yeah. All sorts of people around here smoke it, and if a kid wants to get it, they're going to be able to do it. The only way you can stop that is through, the own understanding of that kid, whether they want to use it or not, or good parenting and those kinds of things. You're not going to stop it through prohibition.
Too often, though, what I've seen with the criminal justice system and the changes in the last 20 years is that there are now so many peripheral industries that are dependent on being, if you get drunk, you go to drunk school now, and you have to pay large amounts of money to be able to go to drunk school. And there are all these other businesses that sit on top of the system in a somewhat parasitic kind of relationship. Same thing for substance abuse counseling. Then you'd have to pay for substance. I mean, those are the organized interests against something like this, I would imagine. But apparently they haven't been too vocal.
They haven't been vocal here locally, but I agree with you. These are parasitic industries that have developed around an abrogation of our constitutional rights. It is a prison industrial complex. I mean, we commonly point out that prohibition only benefits drug cartels, the prison industry. Some people would say it benefits police officers. We don't really believe it does, because we think ultimately at the end of the day it's undermining respect for the police, and it's undermining safety for the police officers as well. So
it's an incredible waste of time.
Incredible waste of time, and we have spent billions of dollars on the war on drugs, and marijuana and other drugs are just as accessible as they've always been. They may be more pure, they may be more strong. I mean, by any metric, the war on drugs has been a failure. So You see these industries that pop up, the probation industries, the court industries, and it's just too much. We should, if we're not serious about enforcing this law, it shouldn't be a law, and that's why I think people are starting to get ready to change it. But by having these laws still on the books, we've created a lot of people who I think have been victimized and have faced more harm by being arrested and going through the system than they ever did from the actual use of
How are you getting the
cannabis.
word out to voters? Because it's a very small group that votes in an election, off-year election like this. Do you have an advertising budget? Are you using social media? How are you getting the word out?
We are doing this. This is a very, no pun intended, grassroots initiative. We're hoping on word of mouth. Did just get some yard signs. We really don't have an advertising budget. We're going to have some signs out on October 28th at 7 p.m. We're going to have a meeting at the Capital Area District Library. Everybody in the public is welcome to attend. We'll talk about this. We'll answer questions about it. We want voters to be aware of it. But we're hoping that just the common sense of the people will prevail here and that we don't need to advertise it. I mean, we're hoping that a good idea sells itself.
What day of the week is that?
That's a Monday night,
Monday night, and the time again?
7 p.m.
7 p.m. And that's the same time as our radio show. Maybe we should try it. Well, too bad we can't do a live remote, Bill.
Interesting.
Yeah,
it's,
it would
it's
be.
doable, but nevertheless,
Well, you're welcome to come if you like to, absolutely.
I've got a real quick question. How many ballot or signatures did you need? Do you remember?
We needed about 4,300. You need 5% of registered voters in the city of Lansing. We got over 7,000. So
That's a pretty
it's a lot of
impressive-
work.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Especially if they vote. If
Yeah,
they vote, you win.
That's
Yeah.
true.
yeah,
But,
because
you know,
it's a small turnout.
Small
like you said,
turnout.
It's a small turnout. So
We had to remind ourselves who was running against the mayor. And I hate to say that to the candidate, but it was just like, wait a minute, who?
Yeah.
You know, because it is that kind of turnout I'm expecting.
sure.
Well, thank you, Jeff. This is Jeff Hank, and the proposal again, it's called the Coalition for a Safer Lansing. And where will they find this on their ballot?
Should be.
It's under the proposal section for the city of Lansing.
Do they have to turn over a ballot to find
No.
it? It's not one of
Except,
those?
I'm not seeing the actual ballot. I saw the absentee. They're different looking.
Ah,
There's only one proposal, and that's our
Okay.
proposal. So
you're not going to get lost in
come out
amongst.
November 5th and vote yes, and let's make Lansing a more
That's
free,
one thing I
more,
wanted to make
more
clear.
safe community.
Sometimes the votes are confusing, but for
Oh.
your coalition, it's a yes vote.
So
Vote
yes,
yes.
but
Yes.
yeah, that does make it confusing. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
This
Thank
is
you.
LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We've been talking with Jeffrey Hank about the marijuana resolution on the Lansing ballot, but that gets us into discussions about politics and the election. And we're joined by Susan Demas. And Susan is still going to remain a columnist for MLive, which has a pretty heavy Lansing presence now. They've been doing much better at covering state politics and the whole capital city idea. They don't have a print publication here in Lansing, but they're very heavy in the online world now. But she is the new owner of Inside Michigan Politics. And tell us a little bit about that new acquisition.
I'm very excited about it. Inside Michigan Politics has kind of become an institution thanks to Bill Ballinger, who founded it in 1987. And Bill is a former state lawmaker, former member of the Milliken administration, so he has all the experience in the world and put that to good use by putting out a newsletter to kind of give people the ins and outs and nonpartisan analysis of what's going on in Lansing and what's going on with the people who are making the decisions at the state capitol.
Now, there are three political newsletters for the Capitol. There's Gongwer, there's MERS, and there's Inside Michigan Politics. What is the particular niche of this publication?
Well, Gongwer comes out 5 times a week. MERS does too. And we are a publication that comes out twice a month. So for us, it's not the day-to-day coverage of committee meetings, but it's taking a step back and taking a look at what's really going on in the legislative races, what's going on with the people behind the news. What's the real story? So it's a little more in-depth analysis, and it's from the perspective, Bill has been in politics. He brings that perspective to it, and now as a journalist, I bring the perspective as a journalist who has never run for office and would never be elected to anything. But I'm very lucky to work with Bill for 3 years. He will be an associate editor and he will still contribute articles, so you'll still get that level of expertise. And we also have quite a few freelance writers which bring that perspective as well.
So what kind of issue, do you do issue analysis and bill analysis and sort of the inside story?
We don't do it for bills.
Okay.
I know that Gongwer gives you little synopses of,
Mm-hmm.
House Bill 4873 on some obscure, law where can't put fuzzy dice in the window of your vehicle, something like that.
Yeah.
We do more in-depth analysis behind the races, behind the politics of the decision.
So who is your audience? Who are the junkies that say, I can't wait to this? Does it land in their mailbox and does it also come digitally?
It comes both ways. It depends which way you like. And yes, our audience tends to be the diehards, people who are politicians themselves or lobbyists or members of organizations, but, people across the state and lots of people in Washington because, Michigan is a very interesting place politically. So people like to keep tabs on it. And there's a reason why Inside Michigan Politics, thanks to the work that Bill Ballinger has done, has been quoted, in the New York Times and Christian Science Monitor, Hotline, Roll Call, all of those national publications.
How, for example, would Inside Michigan Politics cover something like right to work differently?
We would give you more of the history of the issue because a lot of times what you'll get from your daily newspaper or even from those other newsletters is you might get the blow by blow about what happened, but lost in that is the why. And lost in that is the history. And so that's what you can turn to Inside Michigan Politics for a better understanding of why things are going on.
Now, you're nonpartisan, right?
Yes.
So both sides.
Both
That must
sides.
be an interesting dance, isn't it?
Well, I've been a street news reporter for 12 years, and so it's a role that I'm very comfortable in. And I think that nonpartisan analysis is in short supply these days because there is so much partisan media. So I think this is something that we can really contribute to the debate.
You've also been operating as a columnist, and that line blurs when you move into the role of columnist and you start, expressing your own opinions.
Mhm.
So will there be opinion pieces in here as well?
Well, the newsletter is just nonpartisan analysis,
All right.
and I'm not planning to change that. From my experience, I've juggled the roles of columnist and straight news reporter for 6 years, and I'm very comfortable in that role. It's something that Bill Ballinger has done. He's a former Republican lawmaker,
Yeah.
so he's been comfortable with it as well. Well, I think there are many possibilities for Inside Michigan Politics to go beyond our core newsletter, to do more things online and with social media. So I think we will be going in different directions. I'm excited at all of the possibilities.
One of the sadder things, I think, from my perspective, is that unfortunately the straight news jobs that report on the Capitol have been in decline.
Hmm.
We've seen that the budget cutbacks there. So we see this expensive newsletters filling an important niche for people
Yeah.
who really care about these issues. But it is really sort of becoming a divide, a cultural divide between those who have access and those who don't.
Well, I will say, and I won't talk money, ours is extremely reasonable.
Yes.
So-
Well, right, we're nonprofit, so you can't talk about
Right.
it.
But I will say
Knows the
one
rules.
Thank
thing to
goodness.
make.
Thank goodness. Yes. Yes. But that is a trend that we're seeing,
Yes.
that there is more and more that the price tag on some of these is fairly hefty. So it is.
Yeah.
It is the professionals who buy it.
I do know, obviously you pay a subscription for a newspaper. So ours is subscription based, but, I do think that there is a value in going beyond just, the nerds like me that are obsessed with politics and getting news out to a wider audience, especially because there are so few news positions and news organizations that really report on those things nowadays.
I was really surprised. I mean, I take my trusty little video camera and I go down to the Capitol when I can, and I went down and videoed that Sharia law meeting that they had, and that sort of. I mean, and there's plenty of strange things going on at the Capitol that really will never see the light of day otherwise.
Right.
And it is difficult. It is very difficult. We're in a capital city where so much is going on. Do you also get the sense too that it's just sort of it revved up? I'm assuming there's a there's the slowdown now compared to a summer ago. A summer ago, it was a hotbed of activity as that whole clutch of bills went through. Philosophically, what do you think is happening in the state now? We've watched Ted Cruz rev up the Tea Party at the national level. I'm not sure that I see as much Tea Party activity here in Michigan as I once did. Bill and I used to see their rallies at the Capitol, and they could easily bring out 3 to 4 to 5,000 people. I'm not sure they could do that now. I don't know if they could rev up a crowd like that. Are we still seeing, are we likely to see one party domination into the future here in Michigan?
Well, for the Tea Party issue, they still exerted influence over the Medicaid expansion, which was, the last big issue that they've tackled, and perhaps might be the last issue that we see before the election in 2014. In the end, they were successful enough to delay it until April 1st, but the legislation did pass. So there is anger out there, and there is that effort for a Tea Party candidate to be on the ballot with Rick Snyder as his lieutenant governor. We'll have to see how that plays out. In terms of the overall situation in Michigan, we are going into an election year, and so generally policy goes by the wayside and will be taken over by campaign commercials. And I think that's more of what we're going to see because, Governor Rick Snyder has tried to get road funding passed for more than a year now. And the idea of him trying to get a tax increase passed with a year before his own reelection seems to me to be highly unlikely.
Yeah, that's not usually the timetable for those kinds of actions. Yeah, so we see a sort of status quo in terms of legislation moving, but we're likely to see an awful lot of political activity. And
I think so. And, in terms of who will control things in Michigan, I think we have a competitive governor's race. I do think the U.S. Senate race between Terry Lynn Land and Gary Peters, I think that will be a high money race. It will be watched, but I do think that Peters has an institutional advantage because we do tend to vote Democratic for federal office in Michigan. That's a long-standing trend. It's going to be very hard to see how party control flips from the Republicans to the Democrats in either the Senate or the House because the Republicans have good solid majorities, and we just had the redistricting process. So there are an awful lot of safe Republican and safe Democratic seats where there's no real competition. You know who's going to win as long as you get on the ballot for the general election. And there's just not a lot of turf to fight over.
I heard, though, that Justin Amash was about to get primaried. Is that true?
He is. He is getting primaried, but the idea that a Democrat is going to win that seat is pretty far-fetched.
Right.
But we might have a different Republican congressman. Brian Ellis is a businessman, and unfortunately for him, though, all of the DeVos money has gone to Justin Amash.
Speaking of money, do you see any big money coming into the state, or where's it coming from for these elections now?
Well, we do not have the most up-to-date reporting requirements for campaign finance in Michigan. So a lot of times we go an entire year without knowing where any money goes. And with these independent groups, like Governor Snyder's Nerd Fund, for instance, the now I suppose former Nerd Fund, they don't have to disclose any donors. And that's where an awful lot of the cash comes. And I suspect quite a bit of it comes from out of state. There are a lot of groups and wealthy individuals that have decided to play in these state races because they see that they can get a lot of their agenda done that way. That's a lot cheaper than doing the congressional races or the presidency. So I would say the bulk of it, the bulk of the money flowing in, because it's tens of millions of dollars every 2 years, we really have no idea. As for what we do know, there are the major industries, the beer and wine wholesalers, the MEA, Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're always big donors. There are wealthy individuals like the DeVos family. The Stryker family used to contribute. They really don't so much anymore for the Democratic side. But I think the biggest story is just how much money is coming in that's totally unaccounted for.
One of the challenges at the national level is that I wonder where Alec and the Koch brothers will be playing now. I mean, it is easier to play at the state level and come in under the radar, except for publications like yours, than it is to be playing at the national level where you get so much scrutiny on cable TV.
And there are better reporting requirements.
Yes.
Every quarter people are supposed to disclose, but as we have more of these independent groups, and we'll see what happens with the latest Supreme Court decision in terms of campaign finance, I think in general, that's the trend of a lot of unreported dark money.
I just read that the Koch brothers are putting their money into still fighting Obamacare. They're targeting states.
One of the challenges, I think, for the big money is that they're sort of the libertarian, the Koch brothers, they will go hard right. A lot of the big money is also very strongly U.S. Chamber of Commerce, big businessman money, where they're really not going to go tooth and nail over something like that as much. I mean, they're very interested in the stability. They don't want to see a Ted Cruz rattle the cage and cause 24 billion in losses, in a short period of time at the federal level. So I think we are beginning to see those tensions at the national level within the Republican Party. Are they mirrored here?
That's a good question. As far as the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, which does tend to put money into Republican causes, there's no big money equivalent to Freedom Works, for a Tea Party that really raises a lot of money here. Now, I have no doubt that there is national Tea Party money that comes into Michigan, but they haven't built up a fundraising infrastructure native to Michigan. So I haven't seen that be a direct source of tension. I think, obviously, the Koch brothers are criticized for being far right. Obviously, there's big money that goes to both parties. There are many industries that will play both sides. The Koch brothers have clearly decided to go with one side. But the left has not been without big donors as well. Of course, we heard so much about George Soros playing, especially in 2004.
We tend to hear of Soros, and the list beyond that doesn't go very long.
No, perhaps the left needs to recruit some more billionaires.
It's just those billionaires, once they get that money, move right.
I guess.
I mean,
it's a problem that I'll never have to grapple with, so I haven't really thought about the ideological implications of that.
You don't worry about it at home.
I have been thinking about it because I think that you have this sort of millionaires playground. You have the Sheldon Adelstons, you have the gaming people, you have some various pockets of money out there where they play for their specific self-interest, which may not be the same as, say, General Motors or although Morgan Stanley is more and more, investment banking is more and more like the gaming industry every day. But there are these divisions within that party. Perhaps the Democrats seem fairly unified right now, however. They don't seem to be fighting their left wing. They disappoint their progressive base routinely, but they just sort of take it. They don't seem to care that much. So is a unified Democratic field going to appear here and generate a lot of interest and excitement?
Well, right now it looks like Mark Schauer as the gubernatorial nominee and Gary Peters as the Senate nominee have clear shots, so that's an advantage. It is always odd to see a more united Democratic Party because it's like seeing a unicorn.
It is.
But for the Republicans, I do think there is some tension between more of the Wall Street traditional chamber crowd versus Tea Partiers, because the traditional financial interests want the economy to keep running. They just want lower taxes and lower spending. You've got some of the hard right Tea Partiers that really don't care about blowing up that financial system, if it means making a political point and getting rid of Obamacare and hopefully getting rid of, a lot more spending than people have ever dreamed of. And so I think those interests are coming to a head, but I, at the same time, have not seen any indication that those traditional Republican groups are planning to befriend Democrats at any point. So that's a little interesting tension there.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing. We're talking with Susan Demas, the new owner of Inside Michigan Politics, about the upcoming political situation here in the state. And I don't think there's any danger the Tea Party or any of them are going. They might go third-party libertarian, though.
Well, that would be a very interesting situation. We really have not had that in our history very often.
No.
But, I know an awful lot of people who like the idea of, fine, have a hard right party, have a more centrist right Republican Party, which is, what it was up until, the 80s.
When you said Milliken Republican, I thought that's not at all the era we're in nowadays.
Right. And then the Democrats, maybe they would shift further left.
Yeah.
That would give people a lot more choices. There are an awful lot of people who, might be socially liberal but economically conservative or vice versa and really don't feel like they have a party. So, it could work out very well for people. But obviously with our political system, the two-party system is so well entrenched, it's still hard to imagine that scenario really coming to a head.
As someone who ran for Congress on the Green Party ticket in 2000, I can verify that the deck is stacked for a two-party system. The Greens didn't stand much of a chance, the Libertarians don't stand much of a chance, and it gets worse each year. The only thing that can shake that up, I think, is the advent of social media, in the same way that the Arab Spring took off, even when the experts insisted that it couldn't and wouldn't. There is a possibility of a sort of grass fire approach that can happen. I think the Tea Party started that way. You're right, a lot of FreedomWorks money came in, but the FreedomWorks has now gone bust to a great degree. What we have are people like Ted Cruz. They're having financial trouble right now since Dick Armey left.
Right.
And what you're seeing are people like Ted Cruz who can go around the whole political structure. He made millions on that website that is, come give us $20 and we'll stop Obamacare. Well, you won't stop Obamacare, but you still have my 20.
Right, and I've got your name and information so that I can use that for my presidential run in 2016. So, that's a great tactic for him.
Well, MoveOn.org did that.
Right, yeah.
And
I mean,
now
groups are very savvy about that, and every crisis is an excuse to raise money.
It's never ending.
Right.
There's something tonight, guaranteed. I'll have 3 when I go home. You do not want to get on their email list.
The big issue is whether you're going to see the left form something that was like the Organizing for America effort that got Obama elected, or whether we're going to be seeing Obamacare type websites. I mean, that's part of the challenge. That whole technological infrastructure is still very interesting to see how it evolves. I don't know yet. Whether people will be following elections. The Twitter will change the whole universe for these upcoming elections, and it has already. How much is social media going to impact the elections here in Michigan, do you think?
Well, I don't think that social media influences everyday voters so much as it influences the way that things get covered. Especially during the presidential debates. You saw that certain narratives were being formed online rather than sitting back and everybody reflecting on their own perspective. You would have members of the national press who all start to say, wait a minute, Obama's really doing badly. Oh, he's clearly losing this first debate, and that's what's happened. That's what's happening. And so, I think that colors your perspective and obviously colors the coverage afterwards. And, it certainly goes both ways. But I think social media in that sense can, be more of a pack journalism mentality, which, is dangerous. There's the flip side of social media where you don't have to go through the traditional gatekeepers.
Right.
You don't have to be dependent on newspapers and radio to get your message out. You can get it out directly to your followers, and that could be millions of people. So there are many new dynamics at play. And, it's up for the savvy candidates and the savvy parties to figure out how to harness that.
Susan, do you cover state government at all?
Yes.
Do you do? So it's like administrative rules, how they're applied, or how, like the DNR commission or something like that?
I have. Inside Michigan Politics doesn't do as much of that because, as I said, it's more of the in-depth analysis. But I used to be deputy editor with the MERS newsletter, and I was the only one sitting in those committee meetings that nobody heard about.
Because a lot of the policy is politicized at that level.
Yes.
Very much.
It is. Bureaucracy is a place to reward your friends and punish your enemies, and that takes place all the time.
Certainly does.
Every day.
Yes. So what do you anticipate when you look at these? We know now a bit what you think about the state scene. You're not in the business of covering the national upcoming election, but boy,
I do quite
from
a bit
Michigan.
Of it. Yeah, that was my specialty when I was at MERS because I cut my teeth covering the Iowa caucuses. I went to school at the University of Iowa, so I've got a lot of contacts there and in Washington. So I do try and keep up with the national scene, and I do write about it for columns too.
I am teaching public affairs reporting this semester in 2 sections and tried to talk with my students today about the upcoming candidates in the GOP primary, and they just seemed totally befuddled by the names. They didn't really know these people.
It is early.
It is
early.
Out
of fairness.
It is early. The only one they knew was Rand Paul, and they were just really hoping that he was like his dad on marijuana, but apparently he isn't. So they
don't have any use for him.
I found out the key to Ron Paul's campus popularity there fairly easily, but now we're going to see. So what do you think is going to happen in this? I think it's going to be quite an interesting race coming up.
I do. I don't expect there to be a clear front runner. You've got a wide open primary for the Republicans. Obviously, Mitt Romney is not going to run again. Rick Santorum, may claim that he has the mantle as the runner-up, but he was more of the accidental runner-up. He got the anybody but Romney crown, not really due to any personal popularity. So you've got a lot of up and comers like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. Marco Rubio from Florida is kind of faded. And, who knows? There could very
Chris Christie
easily.
just changed his position on same-sex marriage, and
Oh,
I
did
thought
he?
that, yeah,
Now,
overnight.
now that it's legal, all of a sudden it's okay?
Now that Cory Booker was busy marrying couples and
Oh.
getting a lot of headlines.
Oh, okay. So, and he's, everybody's, favorite from the more center-right part of the party. But once again, for Republicans, the biggest issue is getting out of a Republican primary. And it's
That's gonna
hard to
be the hard
imagine
part.
Chris Christie getting out of that unless he's really able to split up a completely divided field.
I thought the last time that there were people who were baffled to find themselves in that running. I mean, people like Herman Cain. He was clearly doing it because he wanted to make money on the circuit, and he wanted to have a,
Well, it worked out
and it
well.
worked. But I mean, I think he was really terrified. I
What if I
sometimes think he,
win?
yeah, I think he sabotaged himself because he thought, oh my God, what's going to go? I don't really want that job. But those candidates seem to, I don't see those candidates in the race now. The field that you
Yeah.
mentioned are credible people who have held
Right.
elective office, who have a following, who have some credentials in the field, but they're still, some of them, fairly extreme in some of their views.
Well, I do think the Republican Party has shifted demonstrably
Yeah.
to the right in recent years, and so its rising stars tend to be from that wing of the party, and anybody who was a true moderate, like of the Milliken mold, has been run out of the party a long time ago.
I keep reminding people of Lorraine Beebe, who I knew back in the old days, who talked about her abortion, a Republican, talking about her abortion on the floor of the Michigan legislature. I mean, that simply wouldn't be done nowadays. She would have been drummed out of the party long ago, I think. And it seems, too, that in pulling the Republican Party to the right, they've also pulled the Dems in the same direction.
I do think that, Obama basically has governed very much as a centrist, and many of his policies, are things I don't think Ronald Reagan would be particularly offended by. I mean, the centerpiece of Obamacare is the individual mandate, which was birthed by the Conservative Heritage Foundation.
Which
These-
progressives like me find odious.
Exactly. Anytime people call him a socialist, some of my old socialist
We keep wishing
friends
we're there
from
with the
college,
pom-poms on the other side on the left going,
Right.
yay, socialism, yay!
Well, some of my old socialist friends from college are like, "That's not socialism. What are they talking about?"
I know.
So, but the socialist wing of the Democratic Party never quite caught on the way the Tea Party did for the Republican
No,
Party.
they didn't.
So,
Only in the 70s.
That's a real understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Whoa.
Bill and I talk about the fact that we were briefly in fashion. The 60s didn't start till 68 in the first place. So when you talk about the 60s, it ran from 68 to 72. So for 4 years, Bill and I were in fashion. Every other era in this country, Bill and I have been way out of sync with the mainstream of the society.
But we didn't elect a president.
We didn't elect anybody.
No, so-
Used to be able to use my ballot as a mirror image of the winners. All the way down to in the old days when you elected the dog catcher. Yes. But I mean, my first vote was I going to go with Eldridge Cleaver or Hubert Humphrey? I mean, that's a hell of a choice when you stop to think about it. I'm not sure we get those kinds of glaring choices anymore.
No, I wouldn't think so. And there is so much money in politics. So, I think that there's a real interest for Democrats to be more centrist because, they're getting money from political action committees as well.
Those of us who view it a different way don't call it centrist, we call it Republican light. That Tony Coelho decided in the Clinton administration that he could get his hands on some corporate money. And the theory was, for a while, they tried to sell the idea that you could take that kind of money and not change. Yeah, well, you never really can take those amounts of money and not change. My concern is what has happened, I think, is that we've adopted a corporate agenda and an economic agenda for everything. We don't talk even about some of the issues that we used to talk about because unless it can be talked about in economic terms, it simply doesn't even reach the radar anymore.
Well, it'll be interesting. I mean, one of the things to gauge will be our U.S. Senate race and see what their issues are and how much money they bring in. That's going to be a lot of money, don't you think?
Yes, I do. I mean,
Yes.
you have Terry Lynn Land, who seems to be willing to spend a lot out of her own pocket. And certainly, I think there are a lot of people on both sides who are willing to, come into Michigan out of state and spend money here.
She seems to be willing to move pretty far right too right now. Is that right? Because I'd heard her previously, and she sounded a lot more moderate than she seems to now.
Well, coming from a job, as Secretary of State of Michigan, you tend not to, unless you want to, take, positions on
Right.
everything and be a very strict ideologue, because that's not really what the job is.
Right.
The job of U.S. Senator is, you have to deal extensively with foreign policy and with fiscal policy. And, I think for her, a lot of it is, I'm not sure that she has a lot of experience with foreign affairs. And so she's probably trying to work out her own positions on things as she goes along, because she did briefly run for governor. But once again, that's a very different job to have.
One of the things that is, I think, unfortunate in Michigan is that we don't talk about voter suppression because we, in some ways, never liberalized our voting laws so that people can have early voting and they can have all of the Sunday voting and all the other things that the other states are now wrestling over. We've never had that. I mean, I heard Terry Lynn Land talk about trying to reform Michigan to make it easier
She
for
did.
absentee
She was,
balloting.
in favor of
Yeah.
absentee voting. And her record, I don't think you can point to it and say, oh, we're so definitively conservative or liberal. I think she did the job very well. It's a totally different role than what she's running for now.
Yeah.
I do think, we have had some more politicalization of the issue with trying to crack down on, non-citizens voting, which is not a huge problem in Michigan. Trying to tighten up voting laws, so to speak, with third-party people who register people to vote. But it hasn't quite been the issue it has been in other states. We do have the ID voting. I do understand there are a couple of states that are going to you have to register for primaries and for general elections
Oh,
separately.
wow.
So, there are very creative ways if you want to make it difficult for people to vote. But, I went to school in Iowa and I worked there. I was there for 10 years. I was not considered a bastion of liberalism, but we had no reason absentee voting, and it was wonderful. When I had my daughter, and I was home in 2002, I had some nice people come to my door and say, hey, would you like your ballot? And I said, yes, I really don't leave the house, so thank you.
Isn't that nice?
And nobody ever talks about vote fraud in Iowa.
No.
They all know each other.
That's true. It is a very small place.
Small place.
In closing, one of the big issues coming up is the Supreme Court decision that could take Citizens United and put it on steroids and make it even easier for a lot of this 1% money to come into races. Your predictions? Any predictions on what will it happen, and if it does, what happens here?
I would say that the Supreme Court, as it stands, has indicated the direction it's going in, and it would be that direction. They've already established that they feel that money is free speech.
Yeah.
And the effects on the election, I mean, I think we can say, obviously, there will be more dark money.
Yeah.
But there were so many unintended consequences for Citizens United and so many creative ways to fit the law. We won't know until after it's
That's
decided.
right. That's right.
And that's more work for lawyers.
Well, we'll be back to talk about that more in the future. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This was Lansing Online News Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. And we were talking with Jeff Hank of the Marijuana Initiative on the Lansing ballot, and with Susan Demas, the new owner of Inside Michigan Politics. See you next Monday night. Thank you very much.